In our first week of readings, we discovered social justice in action. We found that we must build communities that reflect conscious choice, shared responsibility, acceptance, accountability, and respect. We saw a link with interdisciplinary studies as bridging the gap between the Eurocentric ways of teaching to include Indigenous belief systems. Our week transformed through the readings as we found ourselves questioning past and present ways of teaching. What is the definition of success? It's not the same for all people. Imagine the differences across cultures. We all have different learning journeys, including each member of our future classrooms. This week we found the responsibility to Indigenous education is that we all learn differently. As teachers, we must keep in mind diverse ways of learning and teaching. Differentiated teaching and interdisciplinary practice increases student engagement. It leads to authentic learning. We learned that we need to teach our students to accept and value each other's thoughts and opinions.
Residential schools, the untold history. We learned about the devastating impacts of residential schools on the Indigenous peoples of Canada and how they lost their culture, language, and family structure. We discussed the often untold history about life before the Europeans arrived, and we wonder what Canada will be like now if the Europeans took the time to learn from the Indigenous peoples. Our responsibility as future teachers is to incorporate more knowledge around Canada's first inhabitants and expand upon what we have been taught in the past regarding Canada's early history. We need more inclusive Indigenous practices within the curriculum and classroom. We need to learn from the mistakes that have been made in the past and move forward. It's time for all Canadians to take responsibility and help the healing process so we can move away from being angry and create a sense of hope for a better future for the Indigenous peoples of Canada. As future teachers, we are in a position to help change Indigenous education. We learned about the two-spirit community within the Indigenous culture. Not only are the LGBTQ group accepted, but they are embraced, celebrated, and highly respected. There are so many things to be learned from the Indigenous peoples of Canada. As a group, we are apprehensive about teaching the dark details of the past because we don't want to traumatize our students, but we want to make sure that students are aware of what happened in order to invoke compassion and ensure it never happens again. We've also learned that creating rules together with our students is a great way to build community within the classroom. And we've been reminded to have an open mind, spirit, and heart as we enter into this profession.
Indian residential schools. Growth. We are appalled that these things ever happened in a country that we love so much. Yet we also recognize that these feelings are nothing compared to what Indigenous people must be feeling. We are left wondering how different the lives of Indigenous people would be today if residential schools never were. Transformation. Curiosity is turning to anger as we think about the past and the terrible things that happened to this peaceful people. Responsibility to Indigenous education. It is necessary to understand the pain that was felt in order to make a difference and make sure it never happens again. It is hard to talk about the history of residential schools and how they ever came to be, but it is necessary to move forward and turn this anger to hope and learn about the ways that we can help make every child feel safe at school, how to make it better, and how to make sure it never happens again.
When we looked at contemporary educational approaches, survivance, and decolonizing, we discovered the importance of introducing reconciliation and decolonization into the classroom, and that the first step to achieving this goal is to ensure that everyone feels welcome. We also learned that students experience the need to feel accepted, acknowledged, and respected to be engaged in school. Some of the transformations that we underwent through these discoveries include understanding that Indigenous education ideas will benefit everyone, not only Indigenous students, by providing a natural, calming, and holistic environment to make everyone feel welcome, and that there is still a long road ahead of us as we begin to incorporate the truth into the curriculum. Now it's our responsibility to incorporate patience, kindness, and relationships into the classroom to help create bonds with our students to garner trust and respect. We are the next generation of teachers, and it's up to us to implement these contemporary educational approaches. However, we are still left with some unease about the ethical and socio-cultural nuances that may arise while incorporating Indigenous education into the classroom. When we looked at articles around storytelling, we gained a foundational knowledge into the importance of traditional ecological ways of knowing. We found that traditional oral communication can provide a key piece of learning for our students, ensuring we remember to include Indigenous storytelling through elder teachings and sharing with the community. In the beginning, we had an expectation that this course would teach us everything we need to know about Indigenous education. However, we have transformed and now realize that we will be lifelong learners in relation to this culture. In terms of growth, we're starting to move away from thinking as students and starting to move into thinking as teachers. There will be times where we will fail, and things aren't always going to go exactly as planned, so we discovered that we must remember to keep an open mind. Knowing how to evaluate a resource will prove important when moving forward with our own students, colleagues, and school districts, as well as finding ways to connect with the Indigenous community. Moving forward, mutual respect in the classroom is going to be one of the biggest things that allows our students to feel comfortable enough to be engaged in the lessons, and connecting with our students, their families, and their communities is important to reaching that mutual respect.
Knowing how to evaluate a resource will prove important when moving forward with our own students, colleagues, and school districts, and we will find ways to connect with the Indigenous community. Noticing relationships between curriculum and Indigenous ways will provide a much-needed reconciliation with Indigenous communities. We learned that mutual respect in the classroom is going to be one of the biggest things that allows our students to feel safe and comfortable enough to be engaged in the lessons. Connecting with our students, their families, and their communities is important to reaching that mutual respect. Finding ways to bring the outdoors into our classrooms is beneficial to calm our Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, while providing a natural means of connecting with students in nature while weaving in the curriculum. We learned that recognizing positionality and privilege, as well as challenging oppressive power structures, is a step in the right direction to fulfilling the role of an ally as part of our professional responsibility. Moving forward, we recognize that we will continue to be lifelong learners within Indigenous education, and that in order to be successful allies, we must always keep an Indigenous perspective within our classrooms. There is so much more to learn, and we may fail at times, but each failure will provide us with a better understanding of where to go from here.